Now, the debate over the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament is looking to heat up in coming weeks as supporters plan a week of door-knocking and barbecues and other events to garner support for changing our Constitution. With me now to discuss this massive issue is Indigenous academic and one of the wisest thinkers I know on this issue, Anthony Dillon. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. You've written a fantastic piece looking at the voice kind of from both sides. And one of the things that you say is, and we're just going to read you a quote from it, if the voice does get up, its highest priority should be to abandon the prevailing ideology that Indigenous Australians are fundamentally different from non-Indigenous Australians. You go on to say that the voice must be active in changing the dominant narrative that Indigenous Australians are the endless victims of racism because they are not. Anthony, talk us through this, why you think that, and what this should be doing to inform people who are supporting or not supporting the voice.
And as I said, if the voice doesn't get up, that should still be the highest priority. Look, that ideology has dominated Indigenous affairs for as long as I can remember, at least 3 decades. And the truth is, the commonalities between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians far outweigh the differences. Certainly there are some differences, and they should be addressed, but only after first considering the commonalities.
So, I mean, when you talk about the differences, are we talking about the fact that the majority of Indigenous Australians live, suburban and city-urban lives, and it's really only a small number that are in these communities that we hear about and talk about, that's where the real difference lies?
Yeah, that's often the case, for those that are living in less urbanised, remote communities. And, sometimes language can be a barrier there as well. And they so they have the same needs, but those areas aren't resourced as well.
Right. So it's really, it's about a resourcing issue, and it's about that, understanding that there is a real difference between these two kind of groups of people in this country. And
generally speaking, that's where the difference is.
Yeah. And you also write that the number one reason why we are not seeing the gap close, because of course that's the thing we're talking about, closing the gap, despite considerable investment in programs that aim to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians, is because they have been cast as been having vastly different needs from other Australians, but they essentially have the same fundamental needs as everybody else. Again, talk us through what are these fundamental needs? Where does the idea of this difference come from?
Okay, well,
is this being driven by the activists?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it gives them a special job, and they become the caretakers and that sort of thing. And but as we were just saying, yes, the commonalities. They need good, safe living environments. They need jobs. They need good schools to go to. So how's it being driven? By people who like to get a job, build a little empire for themselves.
And if the voice doesn't get up, I thought one of the other interesting things you said is that essentially the all of the things that you recommend in terms of, that kind of closing the gap of perception is actually what needs to be done if it does succeed. Yeah. Explain this idea, because I thought that was sort of interesting, because in a way it seems like you think that the voice should work to make itself irrelevant. Have I got that right?
It would seem that the voice is irrelevant, because what I'm saying is, these things we've just been talking about, that's what the voice should do if it gets up. And if it doesn't get up, we should be doing that anyway.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a reason why we can't do it now.
So,
except, ideology is keeping us back.
Well, but I mean, one of the things about doing it now, there's this whole question, are we going to have this big divisive fight that's going to potentially tear a lot of people apart who shouldn't be torn apart, or do we legislate it? And, Labor could, as Peter Dutton has pointed out, put this thing to Parliament. They've got industrial relations legislation up, they've got all these other laws up, climate laws up, everything else up. They could put this in law and see how it goes. Would you be in favour of them trying that sort of strategy?
I'd like to see the detail. What exactly would they be putting in law?
But if you've got the detail, at least if it's done through Parliament, Parliament can change it.
Sure.
In a way that if it's not locked in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Right.
And the Constitution should be the very last thing I think we consider.
Yeah. And I want to, the interesting thing, because we've had a lot of conversations about this, Anthony, is you're an academic, how do other academics compare their views to all this. And do you ever feel like you're kind of Robinson Crusoe out on this one here?
Yeah, look, I do feel a little bit alone sometimes.
Yeah.
But certainly many of the Indigenous academics are all for difference. Indigenous people have this culture that makes them so different. They've got to put forth that argument, sometimes to justify their own existence in the universities. But I get a lot of support from non-Indigenous academics and Indigenous non-academics.
So do you ever have academics coming and just sort of quietly saying, look, I can't say it, but, I think you're on the right track?
I certainly have non-Indigenous academics saying those things to me.
Yeah. But I mean, and who are some of the, when you read something like, the Langton Calma report, and I want to ask your views on this because we were talking about this before in the last panel, and one of the points that Jane Hume made, which I thought was really, really good, was that on the one hand they're saying, well, the model's all there. It's all in the Langton Calma report. And then at the same time, they're saying, no, Parliament will work out the model later. Do you think that this approach is disingenuous?
It is, especially if you're wanting people to vote.
Yeah.
People want to know they want a bit of substance before they vote.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Anthony Dillon, thank you so much for your time.